Time with Tina. Hello, how are you? I hope your day was very well. And I am recording this in the evening time. I've never recorded in the evening time. This is my first time, and I'm kind of excited about that. I meant to do it earlier, but things happen in life. You know how that goes. Anyway, I'm glad to be here. I looked at my last video and I thought, oh my God, I was so, it was so bright. And it's not even bright in here, but I was so bright. I was like, I gotta do something about that. But I hope this video is not so bright and it turns out well. But anyway, my topic today is going to be about David. David. The man, the myth, the legend. No, they don't say that about David, but the David I'm talking about is the David from the Bible. Now, let me put my glasses on. I gotta wear it. Now, if some of you don't know David, which I know most of you do, even if you don't read your Bible, everybody knows David. Why is this hair sticking up? Put it down. I don't know what's going on with me today, but yeah, if you don't know David, let me get on. So let me start over again. My topic today is about David, the David from the Bible, and he is definitely a man of God. It says in the Bible that he was a man of God's heart, man after God's heart, and he is somebody very special, very important in the Bible, and that is why he is so talked about so much. Even in the New Testament, he's talked about very much, and that is because he is a very important figure. Now, like most people, you've heard a lot of things about David. You know the story of David and Goliath. I remember in some children's book when I was a child, I read the story of David and Goliath. I mean, that story is in children's books. Children who study the Bible, it's in there. That story is always in there. So everybody knows that David and Goliath. Everybody knows, maybe some people might know the story of David and Bathsheba. That is a story. Maybe somebody knows about David being king and all the problem he had with his children, but he was known after God for going after God's own heart. But what most people don't know about David is that, and kind of everything that David went through, he's the most relatable person in the Bible, in my opinion. I mean, everybody can relate to David. I mean, not to him being king. That's just one part of David, him being king, but just how he led his life. He is a great example of someone who is a sinner, but still loves God. A sinner who's made many mistakes in his life, and who asks God for forgiveness to turn his life around. Someone who goes through very, very, very troubling things in his life, had to overcome a lot. Someone who was betrayed by his friends. We all can relate to that. Someone who's had problems with his family, rebellious children. Problems with his women. David experienced it all. And that is one way that he is relatable. He is the most relatable character, in my opinion. There's many things about David that, I think is very important. And for some of you who don't know, the story of David starts in 1 Samuel. And it's 1 Samuel chapter 17, and that is where we first meet David, when he's just a little boy. He's a little boy. He is out in the field. He's a shepherd. He brought in the sheep. That was his job. His big older brothers, they were all kind of in the military, probably big and strong, and little David was so small, and he just was only good for tending the sheep. But God had better plans than him. He had better plans for him. He had more, and not even his family probably knew how great God's plan is for David. But David was anointed by a man of God, and he went to his house. What is his name? I'm going to link it down below. I can't remember his thing. I think it's Saul something. No, I got to link it down. I do, trust me, people, I read my Bible so much, but sometimes I just forget the name of people, and this is a very important person in the Bible. I actually think it was Samuel. I think it was Samuel, but I'm going to link it down. Samuel was the one that knew God, trusted God, obeyed God, and I think it was Samuel that came to David's home and said, God told me to anoint a king from your home. And of course, the father just assumed it would be one of his tough, strong military sons. And Samuel said, no, it's not them. It's that little shepherd boy in the field there. And then, soon after he was anointed, they went to war. And David wasn't even that strong, that brave, too young to be in the war, that his father asked him to go bring food to his brothers who were fighting in this war. And then there was these big Goliath fella who everyone was afraid to fight, but David said, I'm going to beat him. And of course everyone must have laughed, this little boy trying to beat this grown giant man, and he did defeat him. God was with him even then. Before David even knew anything, God was with him. And it holds the same for us too. I think of the time before I became a Christian. And I became a Christian very young. I was only 19 years old when I gave my life to Christ. But before that, I've experienced a lot of things that I know that it had to have been God that got me out of this mess. It had to have been God. And see, when God chooses his people, before we even know who he is, he knows who we are. It says in the Bible, in Psalms, you knitted me in my mother's womb. You know every hairs of my head. You know my comings and my goings. David actually was the one that wrote that. David knew God that way, that he knew everything about him before he was born and after he was born and before he knew him. David had that kind of knowledge of God. I always find it fascinating about the Old Testament, even the New Testament, because there was no Bible for these people to read and to get their faith from and to know God from. They just believed it. They believed in God. They believed in his power. They believed in prayer. They held fast to their faith. And they did that without having a Bible in front of them to learn all these things about God from. And that's just, I always find that amazing. And David was one of those things. David is so important to the Bible, so important to everything. That's what makes them relatable. But do you know that David is talked about a lot in the Bible? I think after Jesus, he's the most talked about person in the Bible. You have Moses, you have Jacob, you have Joseph. Joseph is another one that is a very good person in the Bible to follow. But you have all these people in the Bible, and none of them is more talked about David. We know that David wrote the book of Psalms, and he wrote the book of Proverbs, one of his sons, King Solomon, wrote the book of Songs of Songs, also the book of Ecclesiastes. You know, it's all from the line of David, and we also know that David, his relatives, his family, his generation, his ancestry leads to Jesus. How about that? So we know that David is very important. But what makes his character so important is that he's relatable. You know, nobody talks about that much, about him being so relatable to us common people. You know, he was king, like I said, we know he defeated Goliath. We know he messed around with Bathsheba. We know he had been betrayed. We know that he was betrayed by his friend. We know that he was a selfish man. We know he was a bad parent. You know, we know these things about David. If you read the story of David, you'll get to know him as these characters. And because there is a lot to David that we don't know. But the most important thing you need to know about David was he is a man that was after God's own heart. And you see how flawed he was. He was a flawed man. But he still was a man that was after God's own heart. And it goes to show that we can be flawed. You know, it's okay if we're flawed. It's okay if we make mistakes. But one thing that David did when he made mistakes was he repented. You know, he repented. He knew he was wrong. He knew after he made these mistakes, he knew that God was, you know, letting him know he did not approve of these mistakes. And he tried to get himself right with God because of it. He repented. He said, you know I made these mistakes, God. If you read Song of Songs, you'll see a lot of that. You'll also, when you read Songs of Songs, you'll see that he was in anguish a lot of the things he was going through. There came a point where he had to run because I think Saul had tried to kill him. I think at one point his soul had tried to kill him. At one point his own son was trying to kill him. He wanted to take over the throne. This is a common thing that goes on with kings and queens. Somebody's always trying to kill you to take over your throne. It even happened in the Bible by his own son. He had to flee. He didn't know who he could trust anymore. He had only a small amount of people he could have trusted. You know, he was going through a lot. And a lot of those songs was when he was on the run, trying to save his own life, get his own life together, because there were people very close to him wanting him dead. Now, it doesn't talk a lot about the women in his life. We mostly hear about Bathsheba, but he was married to a lot of women, and you know how women are. They all want something from you. You know, but he had problems with them. I can imagine. I can just imagine when David slept with Bathsheba and then killed her husband. She was a married woman. And David had her husband killed by putting him up front in the military. And he married Bathsheba. I can imagine what those other women must have thought. You know, what they must be, you're bringing in another woman? We already got problems already, you know. And they brought in Bathsheba. It doesn't say if she got along with them or not, but I could just imagine, you know. But anyway, if you read David's life, his story, you know, it wasn't all glory. It wasn't all glamorous. It wasn't all happy. Because of a lot of the mistakes he's made, you know, a lot of the choices he made, who he decided to have in his life. And we make those same mistakes even now. You don't have to be perfect to follow God. That's not what God is asking from us. Last week I talked about um, the leaders in the church and false prophets and pastors that stand at a pulpit preaching and they live a double lifestyle. That's one thing. Totally standing up there and talking about God and totally leaving a double life, that's another thing. I'm not talking about those people. They were never true Christians to begin with, and God already knew that. I'm talking about people who do their best to follow the Bible, believes God, live their life trying to be the best person they can. I'm talking about those people who sometimes fall into temptation, who sometimes, don't always do the right thing. In the scripture, the Bible said the spirit is willing. And we're always willing to do the right thing. We want to do the right thing. We desire to do the right thing. But our body is weak. So is sometimes our hearts. So sometimes what goes on in our head. Because this is a broken world. And there are more bad things happening in this world than good things. We're more around bad people than we are around good people. And as the world gets closer and closer to the end time, we'll see these things more and more. We'll see people as they really are, their true colors, and their true intentions. We will see if they're real or not. And hopefully there will be some repentance. You see, the thing with David is that when he knew he wronged God, he knew that his actions would not be favorable to God. And when they fell apart, when they didn't work, when he was caught, he prayed to God and asked for forgiveness. And God gave it to him. It is God that refers to David after a man of his own heart. Because despite his flaws, he was still someone that was after God's own heart. God still approved of him. God still loved him. And God forgave David. David did do some wonderful things as well. We can't just talk about all the bad stuff about David. He united the 12 tribes of Israel. He tried to form allies. He was probably the first king that, doesn't want to fight all the time. He doesn't want war all the time. He tried to have peace with the surrounding nations and the surrounding tribes and religion or whatever. He tried to find peace with all that. He was a man that did not want war or time and all this death going on. He tried to do that. He wasn't a very good father. There was a lot of fighting among his kids. His own daughter was, I think, raped. And his brother killed the person. It's a lot of stuff going on. One of his sons was trying to kill him. There's a lot of stuff going on with his kids. And he probably was not the best father. So, but God still says he's a man after my own heart. So what I'm saying to you and everyone is that we do not have to be perfect. Take it from David. He was not a perfect man at all. But God still chose him. He, after Jesus, he is more written about, talked about. Whenever somebody preaches, they use David's story a lot. One of his stories, at least. But he is very important. He is somebody that story can relate to everyone. Everyone, some part of you can relate to David. Not the part about him being king, but you can relate to him. You can relate to him and his problems with women. You related him and his troubles with his children. Somebody betraying him. Somebody trying to take what he has. We could all relate to him. And we could still be chosen by God to do great things, despite being so flawed. Because that is what I want everyone to know about David. Is that he is the most relatable person in the Bible, and the most talked about besides Jesus. You'll find David's stories, and I didn't put up any scriptures because there's so many scriptures to put up about David, but if you want to read David's story, his life, go to 1 Samuel 17. That's where it begins. And he's talked about also in 2 Samuel. And he's in those both those books he's talked about the most. And he's also talked about in the New Testament. And Mark begins with talking about David. David is everywhere in the Bible, mostly everywhere. He wrote songs, he wrote Proverbs. Proverbs is one of my favorite books because it's very straightforward. And I think I ought to do a list of some of my favorite books to you, but yeah. If you ever want a straightforward answer, go to Proverbs. But yeah, there's a lot to David that we all need to learn. So I pray that you'll read his story. I would love for you to read it. Don't go by just what I say. Read about David yourself. There's so much you probably didn't know about him. But read his story and you'll find how relatable you are to him. So I hope you enjoy my little tidbit for this week. February is coming, and I think I'm going to do a special about love in February, but I hope you enjoy. I hope you got a little bit something out of David from me, but I think you should read 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel and get to read his story for yourself. Don't take my word for it. I thank you for spending time with me, and I hope I see you next week. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.